US President Donald Trump's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping has resulted in a simmering of trade tensions between the two superpowers, which could have a knock-on effect for Europe. My name is Angela Skujins. This is TVP World, and I'm joined here in our Brussels studio by Dharmendra Kanani, the Chief Operating Officer and spokesperson for the Friends of Europe think tank. He is here to explain what this impact on the bloc could be. Hi, Dharmendra.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So as I just mentioned, China announced on Thursday that it would unpause export controls on those rare earth minerals for 1 year. Does this bode well for Brussels when it comes to its supply chain issues?
So I think it's important to put this in a wider context of how Mr. Trump does deals. We've been here before in terms of, let's say, people suggesting that simmering down or a close setting up or a warming up of relations, and then something happens, and I take the example of Canada. A simple advert has changed everything for the future of trade relations between America and Canada. So in this context, this is about bluff followed by deal making, and then a conversation that would suggest it was 12 out of 10 in terms of its impact for Mr. Trump. Now, I think it was interesting how the Chinese responded with saying that it was hard work. And I think here the issue is we have to understand that rare earth minerals are the 21st century's gold rush. We have to completely understand that. Every leader, especially one of the most powerful leaders in the West, Mr. Trump, knows it will basically underpin a future digital electric economy. And he needs it, as do many others. And so and China, for example, for Europe, this is quite, I can't get to your point, China supplies over 99% of these to Europe. And China is the largest refiner of these. And I think what's interesting in this regard, and I'm wondering whether, again, the EU has been caught off guard, is that he's basically been over to Asia, attempted to woo nations which he had basically royally cheesed off in the early part of the year with sanctions, and saying, it's okay, I'm your best friend, let's do a deal. And I think here the issue for Europe is, given that its majority of supply chain of these rare earth minerals comes from China, is where are you, EU, in this debate? And so he has basically gone forward, he's been proactive, he's attempted to woo the Chinese in this way. The question for Europe has to be, where are you in this? What are you planning to do? And what we do know is, given the tensions and relationships between China and the US, the Chinese aren't going to forgive very easily what happened in terms of going up to over 100% on tariffs. What they do know is they've worked really well with the EU. Despite skirmishes in the past 5 to 10 years, both of the EU's and China's historic economic growth and development has been tied. It was the kind of the crescent of globalization. So China prospered, EU prospered. And also, China knows that it would prefer to have a value-based, stable, mature, professional governance model and political deal-making than a frenetic, unpredictable, highly emotional game player. So I think there's all for Europe to lose or gain. So what Europe needs to do is get into the diplomatic effort to say, there's an alternative. How can we make sure that, given our tied close relationships, I mean, China invests hundreds and billions into Europe. Europe equally has a trade relationship with China. And so I think it's a case of, how do you reposition Europe in this new gold rush era, which isn't simply about saying a malevolent kind of deal making. One of the things the audiences have to understand is that this particular mineral, let's say rare earth, is in big deposits, but not in Europe. It takes a lot of energy, and it requires a lot of technology. It can also create radioactive waste. Mm-hmm. And so having a partner like the EU that's committed to climate action and adaptation, and saying actually to China, let's work together because climate change has no borders, and rather work with someone that we can trust and be dependent upon and reliable rather than unpredictable, is the best way forward.
But where is the EU with its own discussions with China. We know that a high-level delegation from Beijing will come to Brussels on Friday. They're going to speak to technical experts here. Is this really going to shift the dial so that the EU can access those rare earth minerals in a consistent manner?
I think that what we have to bear in mind is this can't just be about rare earths. It becomes a one-way street.
Okay.
It's all about Europe and nothing about China. But it's about the world economy at the end of the day. Because if you don't have enough of them, cars, batteries, everything that opens and closes is not available to us, jets, etc. And so this is about the EU thinking broadly and widely about what needs to happen in the next 10 years. And China needs the EU market as much as EU needs the Chinese market. And there are many ways in which they can collaborate. So rare earth minerals are one aspect, but perhaps working on electric cars is another. Opening up markets for each other is another. So it's more about a broader set of characteristics for a trade deal that's been, let's face it, it's been stalled for over a decade or more. But given the histrionics of the US, the EU just needs to take a firmer view, a bolder view of its future and thinking, we need this relationship. And so we can do all the politics about saying systemic rival, competitor, not what, etc., and all the words that, the sloganeering about the relationship. But at the end of the day, what we need is both parties to come together, not necessarily in the public domain, but to say, the world order is changing. We have someone for the first time that's the most unpredictable that is affecting our global stability. We can find another way.
But what's interesting, you mentioned unpredictable histrionics, and is the only reason that the US is now going to access these critical rare earth minerals because Donald Trump used those tariffs as leverage. Is the EU perhaps acting in good faith here and it's not bearing the fruit that ratepayers or people within the EU actually need?
I suppose what belies your question is that there's two things. One, the US is one of the largest economies in the world. Its history matters. It, came in and swooped in to ensure that we had success in World War II. It's been an alliance partner. It's been the handmaiden of most of international multilateral institutions, and it's been up to this point until this most recent number 2, Trump, a reliable source of security and stability. And perhaps Europe took that for granted and didn't see what might happen if Mr. Trump got in. So I don't think the European taxpayer or European politicians, with the exception of Mr. Orban and Fischer, would like von der Leyen to say, I'm going to behave like a bully and use my economic might and my 4th largest market to behave in that way. That's not how things should be done. If we did that, we'd be going down to the lowest common denominator of politics, political behavior, and weaponizing trade, and thinking about this ideology of me first rather than the world first. So I think Europe shouldn't be going down that road. I think Europe should stay true to why it was created in the first place. Remember that as both a conscience and a compass to how it behaves politically, foreign policy-wise, and diplomacy-wise. But the point here is they need to become much more assertive, have greater self-esteem, and know what assets they have. And, Europe has a number of multiple assets which it should be working on, and realizing that there are more people that would want to do business with the EU than with the US. And so start loving Latin America. Have a different relationship with Africa, which is not about paternalism and saying, we just want to raid you, but we want to work with you. And we see you as a partner in a global economy, and Southeast Asia. And I think that you need a reset of foreign policy, but also trade relations, where the EU could be, I wouldn't say the queen maker, but it could lead the charge in establishing an alternative and saying, it doesn't have to be this way. We can do it differently.
We'll have to see how that pans out, particularly
Indeed.
with the Mercosur deal. But just picking up on the foreign policy thread, we know that at the outcome of the meeting between the Chinese and American presidents, US President Donald Trump said that both leaders would be working together when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Do these two leaders hold all the cards when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine?
No, Mr. Putin does, unfortunately, and that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
And let's not forget. People tend to forget what happened 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and also before Mr. Trump was elected. What was the thing? We're going to close the war down in 3 days.
Yeah.
We've had several discussions, both with Mr. Putin and Zelensky and others, saying the deal's coming. Really good guys. I get on with these people. We have to work with a political doctrine and a playbook that is very much about speaking to soundbite-led citizens and the media, rather than the actual earnest, important, hard work that's required in achieving difference in relationships, diplomatic ties, and creating trade deals. Mr. Trump will do that through his social media account, which is a totally different approach to what any world leader has done historically. What we need now is a very different approach led by the EU to think about what does it do in relation to maintaining support for Ukraine, and realizing that, America's very far from Europe and Ukraine. Ukraine's on our border. And we've got men, women, and communities dying to support the security and stability of Europe. I think most people get it, and we know through our own polling of citizens across Europe that the majority of citizens, in the major economies, continue between 60 to 74% support the need to defend Ukraine, but also support it to a better outcome. And when asked if there should be a jettisoning of territory, majority of citizens between 18 and 35 in these major economies through our Debating Europe platform clearly state it's better to have a sustainable, just peace rather than a deal-making peace. So that people actually in the community and on the ground can see what's going on. But in terms of whether it's President Xi Jinping or Mr. Trump, yes, they're powerful. And Mr. Trump is absolutely powerful. But when you think about, and this is where we need to constantly read the compass, is that on the same day that he says we're going to work together on Ukraine, we have troops leaving east of Europe. We have thousands of American troops leaving the border with East. You're
talking
east
about the withdrawal of US troops from Europe's eastern flank,
absolutely.
Romania.
We know that there have been hundreds and thousands of US troops, and piecemeal on a piecemeal basis, on a week to week, month to month, they're planning major withdrawals to say, actually, we've done enough. You need to pay more. Get on with it. So I think in that reality, when you ask that question about whether President Xi Jinping or Mr. Trump have all the cards, no, because on the other side, there's a strategy which is about a me-first strategy to say, I want my troops back. It reflects the real commitment for peace in Europe. Because if before the election, Mr. Trump said, I will be able to sort this, and we're now 8-9 months into it, we don't have a deal. We don't have a peace deal. And what we see is like today, and that we've seen in many discussions, there's a good guy, I get on really well with him, is the dialogue. And then things unravel. And so we need to get used to that and not... The worst thing we do, I think, in the world population in Europe is to be rabbits in front of headlights and jump every time there's a tweet. Realize that's not government policy.
Yeah, it's also hard to do because he is arguably one of the most powerful politicians in the world. It's hard not to do that.
Of course not. But then I think the media and everybody else create this kind of frenzied intensity on everything that's said. And actually, how do you give space? And I think it's partly also politicians in the Western Front, if you like, for not standing up and being far more vigorous. And, it's that classic tale of we all know bullies in the classroom and in the playground. What do? They prey on fear. They prey on vulnerability. And here we are, one of the most powerful leaders in the world that has basically a stability and security core across the world and a large trade relationship with the world, suddenly saying, I'm going to turn that on its head and I'm going to bully you into behaving differently. That's the worst thing any Western leader could do, is to acquiesce and to understand you have some cards on the table. You have some things behind you. And this is not about the playground or a chess game. This is about people's lives, and leaders need to really remember where they've come from and the kind of governance that we've created in this world and say, enough, we find an alternative, which is not to say you exclude, you just say there is an alternative. But at the moment, what's happening is a bludgeoning away of multilateralism, a bludgeoning away of trade as not as a reciprocal mechanism, as a weapon. And suddenly we can't talk about equality, diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see what move the EU has to counter these. This is unfortunately all the time that we have for today.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Dharmendra.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching. My name is Angela Skujins. This is TVP World, but make sure that you stick around as more news, commentary and analysis is coming up. See you next time.